this is the delusional side of the race debate. And unfortunately, this is what tends to take precedence, is the delusional side of the race debate. So for another example, the editor of Ebony magazine, she's on TV and says killing white people should not be considered a hate crime.
How do you feel about the president defining this as a hate crime?
You know, I have to say I would not describe hate crime as the most comfortable word choice considering these circumstances. There's so much that we do not know about what took place, what motivated this person. We only have the one account of law enforcement. We haven't had the opportunity to really look into his history in a meaningful way. When we use a phrase like hate crime, we're typically referring to crimes against people of color, people of various religious groups, LGBT people, people who have been historically attacked, abused, or disenfranchised on the basis of their identity. To now extend that to the majority group and a group of people that has a history with African Americans that has been abusive, and we could apply that to either police officers or to Caucasians, I think gets into very tricky territory. So I'd be curious to know if he was referring to this as a hate crime because he singled them out by race or attempted to single them out by race, or because they were police officers.
Okay, it's an amazing statement, right? There can't be a hate crime against anybody except black people. This is an extension of what we saw Mark Lamont Hill say a couple of days ago: black people are incapable of racism. Right? You can't have a conversation with this. You can't. Because now you're suggesting that anytime a black person kills a white person on a racial basis, there's nothing there. We just have to pretend that nothing happened. You can't have a conversation about that. If you hate white cops, then it's not because you're a racist, it's just because you hate white cops. This is insanity, but this is the delusional conversation we have, and it's all over the TV, all over the TV. Here's another TV host. This one I think is the former Miss Alabama. She actually the other day called the Dallas killer a martyr. So she had to come out yesterday and acknowledge that and apologize for it.
I never said that I don't care about it. I never said, you know, anything negative about the officers.
Well, what you said
I only
is,
said that
you said you don't.
I'm struggling with my feelings.
Well, no. Well, you also said I don't feel sad, and you said that you viewed him as a martyr. So you've got to be able to understand why people are really angry at you, no?
I do. I understand. The word martyr is what the headline said and what people have been holding on. And I understand that the use of that word really triggered people. Of course, you know, I was very emotional at the time, and I could have chosen a different word. I mean, that I definitely don't agree with. But, you know, we're all human. I'm not perfect, and people say things, and
so
things are taken out of context all the time. So I keep explaining to people that the word, I wish I had chosen another word. I just have to take responsibility for the word I used at that time, and I take responsibility for the use of that word. But the context in which I was thinking about martyr was for the definition. If you look it up, it says a person who dies for his belief. I keep telling people, Micah Johnson is not a hero. He's not a martyr to me. I don't believe in a cause that calls for the killing of individuals. So yeah, in hindsight, I look back and I could have used a different word, but I definitely didn't use that word to raise him up, glorify what he did, or condone any actions.
Of course, she meant to glorify and raise him up. And this is the problem, okay? Again, it's this delusional sense that you're talking now about a black guy who murders white cops for no reason. For no reason. They didn't do anything to him. For no reason. And he's being called a martyr. And again, this is common, folks. It's common. It's not a fringe thing. This is endemic in the roots of leftist ideology. Here's another one. An HLN guest comparing the Dallas cop shooter to a kid punching a bully. Oh, the kid's fighting back. Fighting back by murdering innocent people.
I want to put this in terms that the youngest person in your audience can understand. Pretend like this is daycare or elementary school, and there is a bully that is kicking your butt every single day that you go to class. And finally, after you get in your butt kicked so many times, somebody rushes in and knocks that bully down.
Wow, Spirit, you're actually, wait, Spirit, you realize what you just did, right? You're now comparing this guy who ambushed the police officers to someone who rescues from a bully.
Hear me.
You're going to end up like Kaylin.
Hear me.
I mean, come on.
Listen to what I'm saying.
I listen very carefully. I listen to every word.
I'm not finished, Dan. Hear what I'm saying.
We've heard what she has to say. I mean, and that's what she has to say. Right? And this is becoming a common view. So, and Obama sums it up, right? As I mentioned at the very outset, President Obama had DeRay McKesson to the White House. DeRay McKesson is a race-baiting, race-rioting fan. And Obama has him to the White House to discuss race relations. That's who Obama is. And then afterward, he releases this ridiculous statement.
not only are there very real problems, but there are still deep divisions about how to solve these problems. There's no doubt that police departments still feel embattled and unjustly accused, and there is no doubt that minority communities, communities of color, still feel like it just takes too long to do what's right. And the pace of change is going to feel too fast for some and too slow for others. And sadly, because this is a huge country that is very diverse, and we have a lot of police departments, I think it is fair to say that we will see more tension in police, between police and communities this month, next year, and for quite some time.
Yes, because of you. Yes, because of you.
Okay,
we can stop it there.
I think
because of you. Okay, look at the polling data. Look at the polling data. A huge percentage of Americans thought we were moving in the right direction on race. Black, white, Hispanic. We all thought when he took office we were moving in the right direction on race. That is now down below 30%. That's because of him. That's because he's going out there and he's exacerbating tensions, suggesting that the police are out to get black kids and that the police won't recognize the plight of black kids. That's why. That's why. Because he's creating this false perception, and he does it not just by saying the police need to stop hassling black kids so much when they see them on the street. You know, they could be nicer in their interactions. Not by saying that, which is at least arguable, but by saying the police are out there targeting and shooting black kids. You say that a group of people is out there to target and shoot you. Are you going to be surprised when those people are out in the streets rioting and protesting and getting violent? Is that really surprising? I mean, forget about whether he's responsible for them doing those things. Is it surprising that that happens? When you're ginning up those sorts of emotions in people? Of course not. Now, Bill Maher says that he was surprised nobody has shot a cop sooner based on the amount of terrible things that are happening. Bill Maher. With Chris Matthews, I'm going to say, what do you think, Bill Maher? You look like a Keebler dwarf. Come on, go for it, Bill.
Comes to the police, look, there's never any excuse for what happened. For shooting a policeman, of course, we all condemn that. There's no and ifs or buts. I don't condone it, but I do understand it. You understand that guy? Well, I understand the motivation, yes. I mean, how many videos can you see? How many years can go by when this is going on, when black people are brutally assaulted? I mean, the last one, guy was just right on the ground, and he put a slug in him. I'm surprised somebody did not fire back sooner.
Okay, I'm surprised somebody did not fire back sooner. I missed it. When did these cops shoot at Micah Johnson? I missed that part. I missed the part where they were shooting at him and then he fired back, where they were assaulting him and then he fired back. I missed that part. I missed the part where Alton Sterling wasn't resisting arrest and didn't have a gun in his pocket illegally and probably reached for the gun. I missed that part. Right? But again, this is the part where the left oversteps its boundaries. They're not making a case that's real. They're not making a case that's honest. And I do love the reason I laughed there is because I love the statement from Bill Maher where he says, shooting cops is bad. No ifs, ands, or buts. But... and then he proceeds to give you why he understands why people are shooting cops. I mean, it really is amazing stuff. Okay, so that's the delusional side of this debate, and that's the debate that's being had, is with the delusional. The people who think that cops are out there, they get out there every morning looking to kill black kids. Right? That's the part of the debate. And Obama's pushing that, right? Obama's not pushing the idea that low-level use of force against black people who are innocent is too prominent. That's not the case that he's making. Right? Even that would be a controversial case. But that's not the case he's making. He's making the case that there's a systemic racism that results in a disproportionate number of black people going to prison. False. And that, number two, a disproportionate number of black people are being shot by police. False. So he's saying two false things instead of one thing that may be quasi-true. Here's the thing that's quasi-true, okay? Tim Scott, black senator from South Carolina, right? And he gave a speech on the floor of the Senate yesterday in which he talked about his experience with racial profiling, with what he thinks is racial profiling. So here's the senator.
I want to go to a time in my life when I was an elected official and share just a couple of stories as an elected official. But please remember that in the course of 1 year, I've been stopped 7 times by law enforcement officers. Not 4, not 5, not 6, but 7 times. in 1 year as an elected official. Was I speeding sometimes? Sure. But the vast majority of the time, I was pulled over for nothing more than driving a new car in the wrong neighborhood or some other reason just as trivial.
Okay, and then he explains what those reasons are. So there's a couple things to say here. Number one, you don't get to say, I like Tim Scott, but you don't get to say you were pulled over 7 times and then say 2 of those were legit, right? So you're really pulled over 5. The point is that, number one, if he's going to say that he's being racially profiled, he acknowledges at least a couple of those times the pullover was legit. Then he talks about situations in which he was pulled over. He's a black guy driving a nice new car in a predominantly white community, and he was pulled over. Now, what he doesn't say is whether he was brutally assaulted in those circumstances. Like, they pulled him over. Okay, let's say that the pullover was they pulled him over for driving while black. And number one, the statistics show, forget anecdotal evidence, the statistics tend to show that, unfortunately, black drivers speed more than white drivers. They did this experiment in New Jersey, and they found that 25% of the people being pulled over, 23%, sorry, were black. 25% of all the speeders in New Jersey were black. So it was actually slightly underwhelming, right? So they pulled him over. He doesn't explain what happened that was so terrible. He gives one example, I think, Tim Scott, of him coming to the Capitol building, and he has his senator pin on, and the guard says, "I want to see your ID." And he says, "Well, why?" And he says, "Well, I recognize the pin, but I don't recognize you." And he says, "Well, that's racist." Is that racist, or is it because the guard legitimately doesn't know him and it's his first time at the Senate? Like, why? That seems, again, if you name the officer and you name what he did wrong, then we can actually fight officer racism. If you just name things where you are perceiving racism where it may or may not exist, it makes it very difficult to fight it. So last night on CNN, there was one of these town hall events, and a former Chicago Police Department officer who's black got up and started talking. And it's really interesting because he's black, so he says he's experienced it on one end, but he's also experienced it from the other end. And I think this is the kind of conversation we need to be having. Here's the cop.
As a law enforcement officer, I had to do some profiling to protect the citizens that I swore that I would do.
Did you profile black men?
I profiled all people. And here's why. Because it's an effective policing tool. But me having an appreciation and an understanding, having been on the negative side of profiling, I understand the negative connotations that it can bring. But I also understood how effective it can be to protect those members of the community.
So it should be used. It should be you think it's an important part of policing and should be used.
It absolutely. But let me underscore the real point here. There's cultural differences here. There's community cultural differences and there are police cultural differences. And where we have a real opportunity here, Don, is to bridge that divide between the cultural differences. Mm-hmm. Because when you take a police officer out of the police academy and you give him some diversity, immersion, and effective training about the community that he is going to police in, he's going to handle those citizens much different.
Okay, so I think that there's some truth to it, except I think when he talks about the diversity training and all that, that's been ineffective. In Baltimore, you have black cops policing black communities, and it hasn't changed the calculus. The only way you really change the calculus of excessive levels of low-level force being used disproportionately on black folks, for example, the only way you change that calculus is the same way that every other ethnic community in the United States has historically changed that calculus. And that is, you lower the crime rate.
Choice considering these circumstances. There's so much that we do not know about what took place, what motivated this person. We only have the one account of law enforcement. We haven't had the opportunity to really look into his history in a meaningful way. When we use a phrase like hate crime, we're typically referring to crimes against people of color, people of various religious groups, LGBT people, people who have been historically attacked, abused, or disenfranchised on the basis of their identity. To now extend that to the majority group and a group of people that has a history with African Americans that has been abusive, and we can apply that to either police officers or to Caucasians, I think gets into very tricky territory. So I'd be curious to know if he was referring to this as a hate crime because he singled them out by race or attempted to single them out by race, or because they were police.
This is the delusional side of the race debate. And unfortunately, this is what tends to take precedence, is the delusional side of the race debate. So for another example, the editor of Ebony magazine, she's on TV and says killing white people should not be considered a hate crime.
How do you feel about the president defining this as a hate crime?
You know, I have to say, I would not describe hate crime as the most comfortable word.
It's just because you hate white cops. This is insanity, but this is the delusional conversation we have, and it's all over the TV, all over the TV. There's another TV host. This one I think is the former Miss Alabama. She actually the other day called the Dallas killer a martyr. So she had to come out yesterday and acknowledge that and apologize for it.
I never said that I don't care about it. I never said, you know, anything negative.
Okay, it's an amazing statement, right? There can't be a hate crime against anybody except black people. This is an extension of what we saw Mark Lamont Hill say a couple of days ago. Black people are incapable of racism, right? You can't have a conversation with this. You can't. Because now you're suggesting that anytime a black person kills a white person on a racial basis, there's nothing there. We just have to pretend that nothing happened. You can't have a conversation about that. If you hate white cops, then it's not because you're a racist.